It is May 1706, and just 2 months short of the second anniversary of the Duke of Marlborough's audacious and masterful victory over the army of Louis XIV at Blenheim. Once more the British and their European allies are marching south. The 20 months that have elapsed since that high watermark have been disappointing and riddled with setbacks, and now Marlborough has lost all patience and settled on a simple campaign of destroying his enemy. His objective is to obliterate the first French army he meets in the field. At the other side of the line, the Franco-Bavarian army of Flanders is under the command of François de Neufy, Duke of Villeroy, who has thus far spent the war being bested by the Prince of Savoy at Chiari 5 years earlier, and then taken prisoner the year after. Although Villeroy has held the line against Marlborough's forces for the last 2 campaigns, recent letters from King Louis and the stellar victories of his fellow French commanders have left Villeroy feeling that he is in danger of removal. Thus, he has cast aside his characteristic caution and begun marching his own 60,000-man force directly at Marlborough, with the intent of destroying him and winning the peace for his king and France. Thus it is that 2 allied armies, both tens of thousands strong, are being led by their generals for an all-out brawl in the heart of the Spanish Netherlands, both sides hauling hundreds of guns for the barrage that will shake the earth itself. All of Europe waits for the outcome, with nothing less than the supremacy of the continent at stake between the civilizations of France and England. If you love analyzing historical battles on my channel, you need to play this RTS game, Supremacy 1914, the sponsor of today's video. It is a massive free World War I strategy game where you control a real nation's entire economy and military in a battle for world domination. This isn't your average strategy game. Supremacy 1914 rewards deep strategic thinking and tactical execution. You're pitted against up to 499 real players in real-time campaigns lasting for weeks. Forge your ultimate war machine by deploying a mix of heavy artillery, tanks, and cavalry. Turn the tide of battle by deploying heroes, legendary commanders wielding unique war-altering skills. They can drastically enhance forces under their command, instantly supercharging your army's marching speed, artillery firepower, or the defensive line of your infantry. My favorites are the stormtroopers, the ultimate embodiment of ruthless aggression. Built to shatter heavily defended enemy positions, these elite shock troops will spearhead your most devastating offensives. Supremacy 1914 is free on all major platforms. Click the link below or scan my QR code to get an exclusive free starter pack. You get hero medals to unlock the legendary hero Lawrence of Arabia and 1 month of premium account features. The offer is valid for the next 30 days. In the immediate aftermath of Blenheim in mid-August 1704, the Allied army is battered and bloody, but still a very much intact force of approximately 40,000 men. Meeting with his allies, Marlborough suggests staying in the field and pushing into France, aggressively bringing the war to Louis's homeland, and so forcing his hand to sign a peace to their advantage. The rest of the year up to the winter is taken up with this approach, and the Allies take Trier, Landau, and finally Trarbach successively in October, November, and December. Marlborough begins the campaign season of 1705 with the same vigour and purpose, but the year transpires to be such a disappointment that he actually decides to retire from active duty the moment he is given leave to stand down from his post. The frustration arises mainly due to the reluctance of Marlborough's allies like the Dutch and the Danish to abandon their positions close to home and march with him on daring and hard-to-predict forays. In 1705, Marlborough's decision is to strike at France through Lorraine, rather than the sturdily defended Flanders, and either bypass or draw out the garrisons of fortresses like Metz and Verdun, but promised detachments from those nations do not arrive to join. Marching from Maastricht to Trier, Marlborough finds that his ammunition and ordnance magazines have not been sufficiently supplied by his allies in his absence, and a 30,000-man army under Ludwig of Baden he had expected does not show up either. Meanwhile, Louis has placed the capable Marshal Villars in defense of Lorraine, and he takes a proactive stance initially, launching an assault on Trier prior to Marlborough's arrival, and then hurling hit-and-run strikes at the Imperials bunkered down in Landu. In spite of his limited support, Marlborough elects to press on with his plan to drive into Lorraine, but he finds that the tricky Villars has now changed tack and fortified himself and his army in Cirque, happily sitting there and waiting for Marlborough to hurl his army into the teeth of his guns and musket lines. Reinforcements for Marlborough arrive in the form of Danes, Prussians and Southern Palatinate Germans, but Baden and his sizable army are still a no-show. Marlborough's campaign is fatally struck when urgent messengers arrive and inform him of a French attack on the Wallonian town of Huy. Marlborough's Dutch allies are demanding that he send no fewer than 30 battalions to staunch the emergency. Seeing the futility of sitting in front of the smug Villars with a skeleton force, Marlborough moves north himself on the 19th of June, leading with the cavalry contingent and followed by the infantry, arriving at Duren on the 25th. Though he has recaptured Huy by the same day, news arrives from the south that Villars has taken advantage of his withdrawal and linked up with an army under Marsan. Together, the two marshals have struck into imperial lands and gained significant ground around Wissembourg. Bitter at the reversal, Marlborough saves some face with a successful attack on French defences in the vicinity of Chateau Vanguet on the Petite Guette River. Using his customary tactics of misdirection and effective intelligence gathering, Marlborough breaks around and through the French lines of Brabant, defences previously thought impregnable, with British cavalry routing its Bavarian counterparts. The victory brings some satisfaction, but more bad news arrives in mid-August when Marlborough learns that his most effective fellow commander, Eugene of Savoy, has been dealt a thundering check at Cassano in Lombardy. Eugene has been buried in the fighting and brought to Austria to recuperate. Baden, meanwhile, finally coming to the fore, has shored up the line against Alsace, but after the dizzying triumph of Blenheim, Allied forces appear at a nadir, and there is little to no appetite for any more offensive operations on the part of Marlborough's superiors. Withdrawing from the theatre of immediate battle with the coming of winter and leaving temporary command of the army with Henri de Nassau, Lord Auerkirk, Marlborough embarks on an extensive tour of his allies' lands, drumming up support for a further bout of offensives. His plan to retire seemingly forgotten, he visits Vienna, Berlin, Hanover and The Hague. In these great centres of European power, he makes his case with characteristic aplomb. Having convinced his allies of the need for proactive campaigning, Marlborough then travels to London to put his case before his own Queen and government. The general's plan now is for a holding force of Dutch and Danes to secure the line in Flanders, while he leads another intrepid dash south, right into northern Italy, to link up with the recovered Savoy, and thus land a body blow on the French solar plexus. It is brilliant, and the very antithesis of the conservative Dutch strategy for the war. Nevertheless, Marlborough's politicking has won him the support he needs for the spectacular. Then, in early spring, fate deals him another check. The French win a triumph at Calcinato in the third week of April, and less than a fortnight later, Marsan and Villars win another victory over Ludwig of Baden and take control of both banks of the Rhine. Marlborough's desired thrust south to Italy and a heroic battle alongside Eugene is now an impossibility. The path is blocked. He must limit himself once more to Flanders. Taking ostensible joint command with Auerkirk of the Allied host at Tongeren in the third week of May 1706, Marlborough is all too aware that the centralized French command has once again stolen the pace from his cumbersome coalition. With an aggressive demeanor, the Allied army marches toward Namur, a bellicose and taunting maneuver designed in its scorning action to goad the French into coming out from behind their defences for a battle in the field. Marlborough is pessimistic about such an action from Villeroy, however, until messages begin to arrive that the Marshal has indeed deployed his army beyond the fortifications and is even now past the Dial and moving at pace toward Tirlemont. Marlborough's lethargy immediately lifts, and he becomes a whirlwind of activity. Again, the Danes, Hanoverians, Hessians, and Prussians have failed to arrive in time for the campaign's commencement. Knowing the Danish cavalry is 2 days' ride away, Marlborough sends fast riders to them to press forward and make all due haste. By May 20th, he is at Boche-Lön, where he learns that Villeroy has made a swerve toward Jourdougne. The Marshal is moving to the watershed between the Petite Guette and the Mehaigne, close to the village of Ramillies. Marlborough is all confident. Writing that the French force believe themselves to have the advantage in numbers, he says, "We shall be 122 squadrons and 74 battalions. With the blessing of God, I hope for success." By the night of the 22nd of May, the main Allied contingents are at Cours-Warem, and at 1 o'clock in the morning, Marlborough's right hand, William Cadogan, is dispatched on a scouting mission to locate the French army. Marlborough advances behind with his entire host. 7 hours later, in the vicinity of Merdorp, Cadogan and his men see a French patrol loom out of the mist, and after a biting exchange of fire, the two parties split apart, the French withdrawing from the area, and Cadogan sending messengers with their position to his commander. As he waits for Marlborough's arrival, Cadogan surveys the landscape before him, and down on the plain in which sits the village of Ramillies at its centre, he sees that they have come upon a piece of ground perfect for the deployment of two mass armies. There are no obstacles like hedgerows and trees, only the Petite Guette stream running partway through the centre. As he spots the first contingents of the French advance guard hoving into view, Cadogan can discern that the ground is undulating in parts, and some lines and even landmarks like the villages and roads will not be visible to all sections of the line. This is as much an opportunity as a detriment, and the field reminds him and Marlborough, when he arrives at 10 o'clock, very much of Blenheim. By this time, most of the French army are taking their place on the lines, and Marlborough and his subordinates can see that Villeroy's right wing is taking shape, with the settlement of Tavier at its end, and almost the entirety of the section between Tavier and Ramillies being composed of the French cavalry. The heavy fortified left goes right the way along through the village of Offu and up to Autre-Glisse. Villeroy's plan is to contain the Allied attacks at these points, and then catch them with counterattacks from the cavalry, sweeping in from the right. Ramillies is at the very heart of the French line, on a slight rise that gives it good visibility for most sections close by, but Villeroy's far right wing is out of sight, and only the village church spires can be seen. As Marlborough's army comes onto the field by 11 AM and completes its own deployment, a process taking 3 hours, he can see the ground in front of the French left wing is the most hazardous to an approach, with the stream and the broken nature of its surrounding terrain a particular hindrance. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, everything is ready. The two armies are almost equal in numbers, but Marlborough has a decisive advantage in cannon and mortars, perhaps even half as many as Villeroi's number of about 80, with 120 on the British side. Lord Orkney commands the British right wing, while Auerkerk takes a mixed Dutch and the now present Danish force on the left wing. Marlborough himself takes position in the centre, a little south of Villeroi's opposite headquarters at Offu. The French army has large components of men taken from garrisons, as well as fresh recruits called up, following the losses at both Blenheim and Lixheim the previous year, so it is quite green in comparison with the Allied force. However, its ranks are keen to fight and well trained. It also contains a strong Bavarian cohort under their elector Maximilian II, Emmanuel. Certainly to the experienced French officers, as well as Marlborough himself, it is among the finest French forces any have set eyes on. The artillery barrage between the two armies is a devastating exchange, and then Marlborough's British Right Infantry begins moving forward toward the heavily fortified French left, crossing the ground under the rain of cannonballs and firing in precision volleys on the move. The cavalry rides in support. They are heading to Haute-Église and Offu itself, the stream and soft marshes seemingly giving them no trouble as they continue relentlessly forward. Marlborough has informed Orkney that his offensive must succeed, and the very survival of the army rests on his achieving the objectives. Thus, in spite of the ferocious resistance from the best part of the French musketeers and cavalry posted amidst the two villages, the British continue forward and are seemingly on the cusp of a breakthrough. Dismayed at this all-too-quick implosion of his forces, Villeroy quickly orders that men from further down between Ramillies and Tavier, infantry and cavalry, are to reinforce Offu and Haute-Église, and they sprint to stabilize the line. Nevertheless, Orkney's men stand their ground and are pressing toward Offu and close to overrunning all French positions when a message arrives to pull back. Such is the importance of this order and the chaos of the battle that Marlborough sends no fewer than 10 junior officers and even Cadogan himself to convey it separately. Orkney is outraged as he feels he is on the cusp of a tremendous breakthrough, while Villeroy, some distance away, congratulates himself on thwarting the enemy attack and saving his army from disastrous defeat. What Villeroy seems largely unaware of, however, is that there is vicious fighting also taking place on his far right wing, where Dutch contingents under Auerkerk have advanced through Franconi and are grappling for Tavier. The remnants of the Swiss guards from Franconi join with their fellow countrymen, guarding the larger settlement and attempt to make a stand, but the Dutch push them back and out of the town. The French right flank is now in jeopardy, and the Marquis de Guiscard, the general commanding the cavalry adjacent to Tavier, orders a counterattack. More than a dozen dragoon squadrons are drawn from his rear line, along with a brace of Swiss infantry battalions as support. This force has the capacity to rock the now weary Dutch forces, but instead of making a combined attack in force, the cavalry and infantry attack unevenly and fail to give the enemy a damaging jolt. While this gridlocked fighting is taking place, a force of Dutch dragoons arrive to bolster their comrades, and along with their superiority in Allied artillery pieces, the French and Swiss are pushed back once more. To compound this reversal, another force of Danish cavalry enters the vicinity, and an all-out attack on the French right flank is launched. French officers rush more reserves in the shape of the Red Grenadiers and Rhineland Guard units to shore up the line, but they run into a rabble of retreating personnel from the preceding companies. Some swift action by the same officers stabilizes the situation somewhat, but Villeroy's right flank is hanging on by the thinnest thread, and it will not take much to tip the balance. The commander cannot see this properly from his vantage point near Orfu, for the terrain renders the villages on his far right invisible. But Marlborough is positioned on a rise at the rear of his lines and has an unimpeded view of almost the entire field. With control of Tavier confirmed and Villeroy's reserves still committed to the French left wing, where the French commander is studiously watching the front line of British redcoats for another run across the Petite Guette, Marlborough puts the next step of his plan into action. He orders his brother, Charles Churchill, to begin a general assault on Ramillies in the heart of the French line. Churchill does this with a mixed force of English, Dutch, Saxon, Scots, and dissenter Swiss. They fire as they march into the face of the opposition, which is led by Pierre Comte d'Artagnan. His defending force is also multinational, with French, Bavarian and Irish guards, and even some Spanish personnel. In the streets of Ramillies, the attack is halted, with the Irish reserve falling on the English, keen to avenge their defeats at Aughrim and the Boyne, and the subsequent exile from their homeland. The attackers withdraw, and at this point Villeroy is more convinced than ever that his own battle plan is working perfectly. Both the British attacks on the French left and through the centre have been repulsed. The day is now rushing into the high afternoon. Marlborough, however, has a sleight of hand up his sleeve. Seeing that Villeroy has still not returned the reinforcements he sent out to the left to their original points in the centre, the British general has his right-wing reserve line march south and reinforce his wavering centre, leaving their standards in place so that Villeroy is still under the impression that the full British complement remains poised to march once more on his left. With this strong complement in position, Marlborough has a general advance in the centre ordered, with Auerkirk leading the cavalry against a formidable Maison de Roy, as well as the Elector Maximilian's elite cuirassiers. Auerkirk leads a perfectly timed and executed charge of Dutch and Danish cavalry into the heart of the French and Bavarian lines, succeeding in passing through two lines of French squadrons before running full tilt into the Maison de Roy and suffering a bone-shattering reversal. Another grim melee opens up in the very centre of the field. The loss of reserves sent out to the French left is seemingly compensated for by the elan of the remaining contingents. Almost a dozen squadrons on the left side of the companies attacking Ramillies break and begin a retreat to reorganize. Guiscard, the French comte who earlier shored up the right wing of Villeroy's host, now leads a terrific sprint into the gap to rend apart the entire Allied army and thus bring victory to the forces of the Sun King. Sensing the danger, Marlborough throws himself into the midst of the fighting, rallying and appealing to any units close by to turn and hold the line. At the same time, he gives the order for all cavalry reserves on the Allied right wing to be brought south to reinforce the centre. While performing this action, Marlborough is in mortal danger. The French are so close to him that they actually recognise his officers' markings and begin to pursue him. Marlborough is forced to flee, and again comes close to death when his horse falls underneath him. Thrown into the dirt, the commander is saved by a colonel who provides him with a horse, only for the same man to be decapitated by a cannonball a second later. Sheltered by the Protestant Swiss fighting on his side who scatter the pursuers, Marlborough is conveyed to a point of relative safety. Villeroy, meanwhile, has again not been able to perceive what is happening on the battlefield, as now his vision is blocked by the tumbling waves of gun smoke that have descended on the fighting. Marlborough and Auerkirk regroup their squadrons and battalions, and fortified with the new additions from the right wing, the Allies begin a fresh offensive. This time, the weight of the attack is too much, and the valour displayed by the French, Bavarians and their own allies is not enough to withstand the numbers, as well as the arrival of the fresh and thus far unengaged squadrons from the right. Guiscard begins to withdraw and fall back, pursued from the far right of the Bourbon line by the Danish cavalry. They have been keeping this right flank long under pressure, and it now begins an inexorable collapse. While this is happening, Charles Churchill changes tactics in the attacks on Ramillies village, sending 2 brigades on a flanking manoeuvre to the north that compels D'Artagnan to make a direct charge at them to avoid an envelopment and the capture of his force, as happened at Blenheim. D'Artagnan's attack is a success, and it chases the 2 brigades back to the main line, but his message to Villeroy is over-optimistic that the town can hold. Villeroy still does not grasp the full extent of the collapse, only now understanding the implosion of his right wing. The French commander thus begins to belatedly form a line with the reserves on the left wing, running east to west, perpendicular to the main line, to try and staunch the fleeing companies from the far side of the field. This is again for naught, for the retreating members of the right wing run into it, and at the same time, Orkney once more begins to advance on the Allied right over the Petit Taguet, putting more direct pressure onto the flank of the new relieving force. At about this moment, Marlborough's central infantry succeeds in pushing the defenders from Ramillies, and the French and Bavarian resistance implodes completely. Marlborough has decisively outplayed Villeroy, whose men have fought with astounding bravery, but have been ill-served by misplaced tactical placements. But the ordeal is not over for the French commander. Instead of allowing the French to cede the fields and holding the ground, Marlborough gives orders for a general pursuit of the fleeing French, and he personally joins the hunt, riding through the night and either killing or capturing thousands of the enemy. It is the final hammer blow on what has transpired to be the latest unmitigated disaster for Louis's France, and the obliteration of yet another French army by England's greatest general. Don't miss out on Supremacy 1914. Click the link below or scan the QR code to claim your exclusive starter pack. Instantly unlock the legendary Lawrence of Arabia and secure 1 month of premium features before this offer expires in exactly 30 days. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting and subscribing to my channel as a sacrifice to the algorithm. As always, I'll see you in the next one.